Good morning. Welcome, everybody, to our 9th annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Jamie Machek with the Wisconsin Valley Library Service, and I'm moderating this session and the Small Libraries track today. And assisting me is Jean Anderson with the South Central Library System. And we're so glad you are here. Whether you are a first-time participant or you've been with us for several years, we're so glad you're here with us today. And we have a great lineup for you. Our presenter for the opening session is Dr. Dipesh Navsaria, an associate professor of pediatrics of the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. A lot of you might know him also for his clinic-based Reach Out and Read program, and he is here with us today with the opening session. So Dr. Navsaria, please begin.
Great, thank you very much, and it's such a delight to be with you on this, at least it's sunny in Madison morning here. So it's really been great to be able to think about the world around us and the role that information plays in it, and particularly about libraries over the last year. So what I'm going to share with you is really some thoughts about the world out there that our public is facing, that our society is facing, about how we can think about the role of libraries, and about how you can think about your own roles in helping with what's going on currently in the pandemic. So some of this is really very big picture. Some of this is a little more specific. There'll be some talking a little bit about the pandemic specifically, although there's entire conferences on talking about, science literacy and so on. So I'm not going to attempt to do that justice in a short period of time, but to really kind of give you some concepts and ideas that I think may help you think about how you approach what's going on out there. All right. So standard disclosure slides, which we always do in healthcare, of course. I have nothing to disclose that would create a conflict of interest, because when you do health advocacy and messaging work of any kind, you tend to make no money doing so. And if anyone knows how to monetize that in an ethical yet lucrative manner, please contact me immediately afterwards. So, and of course, I will not discuss any unapproved use of drugs or products in this talk. I might get to the foam cow, maybe not. We'll see. I do tweet in the persona of a small foam cow on Twitter named Dr. Moo. You can look for Dr. Moo if I don't manage to get to her. All right. So, why am I here talking to you? Well, there's often this phenomenon, right? I'm a doctor, and therefore, you should listen. This is actually an important concept, not because I think it's necessarily true that people should just say, oh, you're a doctor, I should trust you. There's a lot of different opinions out there in the medical world. And also, trust is not established simply by saying, well, this is my title and that's all. Nor is trust established simply by wearing a bow tie, although I understand it does seem to help. So there you go. But this whole idea of thinking about trust and what makes people believe something or not believe something, I think is central to understanding some of the let's just say disinformation or misinformation pandemic that is not new. It's not new in this last year. It's been going on for a long time, but is certainly a key and major feature that we're seeing right now in many ways. So first, I wanted to share with you just a brief story, which is how I ended up in the library world. And some of you may have heard me talk about this at another conference or somewhere or the other. I just want to give the abbreviated version because I think it's the insights that I had in that process of ending up in the library world myself, I think are really key and critical to what we're talking about today. We do a great job in our world of silos, okay? Not literal silos. Maybe we do a great job with actual silos too. I'm not qualified to speak on that. But silos, in terms of the metaphorical silos, that we all sit in our own worlds. We sit in the world of early education. We sit in the world of librarianship. We sit in the world of healthcare. We sit in the world of social services. We sit in the world of law. And we don't do a very good job at talking to one another. which is kind of silly, right? Because human beings are human beings. They don't exist solely in a legal silo or a social services silo or a library patron silo or whatever. So we need to think about how we break down silos. And there's a lot of different silos that I exist in, so to speak. Some of them are things like clinical medicine, right? I do actually see patients, yay, and that's a whole world in and of itself. I'm an educator. This is the first week of the semester at UW-Madison, and I am teaching a class this semester. I work in the policy world already. You know, it's 9 a.m. and I've already sent 2 messages to people about some policy things going on in the legislature that are important. I definitely exist in the public health world. My class is actually called Clinical Medicine and Public Health. And there's also translational science. How do we communicate what's out there in effective ways and not just simply lock it up in journals, right? Even our largest pediatric journal does not have a very large readership when you consider the size of the general population. And face it, a lot of papers are written in a way that's not very entertaining to people outside their field. I think the most nerve-wracking thing I ever had to write was a talk at an economics conference of all things, which I have never even taken an economics class in my entire life, right? So I felt completely out of my league. Luckily, they didn't want me to talk about economics. They wanted me to talk about family relationships and connections and all. So, but I was trying to make some connections to economics, and hopefully did not get, well, I did not get laughed off the stage. Who knows what they were saying afterwards, but. So the great thing, though, is that when you do this kind of work, it can be challenging, but I would argue that when you start to get to the intersection of all those sorts of circles, you can actually do some really interesting work and really try to cross between these disciplines in different ways. And I would argue that actually libraries in general, and particularly public libraries, but all sorts of libraries, do a very good job of spanning those boundaries, because we tend to think about information as information. And sure, we have our own silos in the library world, right? We have the children's librarianship world, we have the medical librarians, we have general public libraries, we have specialized libraries of all sorts. Yes, but the reality is, right, that we are often having to kind of reach out and help and try to address what our patrons need. And that sometimes means we have to reach out beyond what our own comfort area is. I always throw this in when I talk about libraries and all. This is my public library growing up, a very small branch in the Queensboro Public Library system in New York City. The weekly trip to the library was just a delight. So I always loved libraries. My family actually bought almost no books. We were heavy library users. So it's from the beginning, right? It was always a special place in my heart. And I always throw in these quotes about, from Borges, right, that I've always imagined heaven would be a kind of library. Where I'm sitting right now is my home study, which we just remodeled a year ago, finished just before the pandemic hit. Who knew? And you can't really see it. There's a few shelves behind me that I'm still trying to get some books on, but there's actually shelves lining all around, because that was like one of the most important features that I felt I needed. And then I love this other quote because it talks really about efficiency physically in terms of bicycles, right? And libraries. They both move people forward without wasting anything, right? That there's sort of this idea of an efficiency of helping people think about information, find information, and evaluate information. And that is a very efficient way of spending one's time. And I will tell you, so many students that I work with, I'm saying, please go talk to the library. Yes, spend some time doing some of these searches, et cetera, but don't spend hours upon hours, because a good targeted search with some expert help can actually save you a ton of time and maybe even also show you some things that you wouldn't have otherwise encountered. Right? So there is a great efficiency in what we do and how we help people accomplish what their needs are. Along the way in my training, I went to the University of Illinois. It's actually where I went to medical school. But in the middle of medical school, as some of you may recall, I found myself wandering over to the library school there to do a master's in library science. My reason for doing so was ostensibly really to learn about children's books and children's literature as part of the Reach Out and Read program that I'll talk about in just a second. But there's a lot of other things that I learned there that I did not expect to learn, and that really helped me think about this in this silo breaking down kind of way. Sitting in one of our core classes that we all had to take, right? This one, the Information Organization and Access course, we were there to talk about the organization and access to the world's knowledge, right? Which is not something that outside of library school I heard talked about, right? And I think that this is really key and critical, that this idea of being able to treat information as almost this abstract thing, that can be plugged into all these different specialized fields is really important. And the other thing was that there was a moment where I realized that, hold on, I was hearing some things that were very similar to other fields that I was in. So on the left, you see a photo of someone, a medical person, I don't know if it's a student or otherwise, taking a patient history. And I will tell you, look, I've been to physician assistant school, I've been to medical school, I've been through residency. We talk about taking a history as if it's the only thing, as if we're the only people on the planet who have ever done such things. But yet I realized as I was sitting in some of those basic courses and hearing about reference interview, hearing about how you should start with open-ended questions, find out what your patron's actual needs are, let them lead you to what their thoughts are, and then you start to bring it down to more closed-ended questions, right? To make sure you're not limiting the discussion and really discovering what their needs are early on. Being intensely curious about what your patient or your patron's needs are, I think is really important conceptually. And the thing is, I realized that reference interview was saying the same things that we talk about in medical interviewing, that there really wasn't a fundamental difference. Yeah, the specialized knowledge and what the goal is. Yeah, I get that, right? But I actually would argue that if you ignore for a moment prescribing, and if you ignore procedures, like, sewing up a laceration or doing surgery or whatever, that when patients come to us in healthcare, fundamentally what they're asking for is information. Here's a set of symptoms. Here's a set of physical findings. Can you help me make sense of it? Can you help me understand it? Which led me to argue that again, with those exceptions, that maybe we can think of healthcare, thinking of medicine as a highly specialized form of librarianship. I actually think there's something to that argument, that there really is a lot coming through there. And finally, I want to add that being able to find information reliably and quickly, even though sometimes, strangely, it's not that hard, especially in this electronic era we're in, where there's online data sources and all that are increasingly accessible to lay users, right? You don't need to know how to download a CSV formatted, spreadsheet filled with data and plug that into another program before you want to generate a graph, right? There's web pages that will often do this for you right there on the web without any specialized training. But still, when you do this and you do this well, people think it's magic. And helping people recognize how they can get their needs met, I would argue, is magic. You have that magic. We have that magic, I hope, in healthcare. You have that magic. Please don't forget that it can look magical, and that if you can help people experience that magic, I think it's a very good thing. So, and I would argue that it's not just technology, it's also education. If you know how to learn and think and talk about things in this way, then again, people will realize, wow, you really have some really important things to offer here, and we'd like more, please. All right, so what did I learn in library school? Like, here's some key things, again, takeaways that help, I think, us think about how to apply this to the information needs. One, we are great at silo breaking in LIS. I still remember sitting in one of those intro classes and having one day realizing that the person to the left of me was there to learn about computer database structures and highly technical things in that level. And then the person to the right of me was actually towards the end of her career, but had come back to do the master's specifically so she could learn about bookbinding repair and restoration and all. And we all got to sit, and I was there for, of course, my interesting needs. And we all were sitting learning a common language and a common knowledge. I honestly think we do that really well in LIS. We have a deep, deep public service mission, and I'm going to tell you right now that public libraries and even non-public libraries, the outreach to public, the accessibility to the public, the willingness to say, what are your needs and not, who are you and am I supposed to be helping you, is better than it is in healthcare. Okay, we've gotten better in healthcare, but still, right? There's the old jokes about the wallet biopsy, right? The patient rolls in and like, well, do they have the right insurance? Blah, blah, blah. You know, it's about the needs of the system and not about the patients. Libraries generally don't do that. Never, ever, please, never, ever lose that. I think it is one of the most precious things we have in our society, that anyone can access what is needed without being questioned. And that, honestly, saving other people's time is a good thing, right? That rather than letting them wander down, you know, the wrong roads or roads that they really shouldn't be wandering down, that if we can save people's time, that's a good thing. So again, I said I went to library school because, in particular, it was early literacy was what brought me there. The Reach Out and Read program, which is in now 262 clinics throughout the state of Wisconsin, serving 1 out of every 3 children under age 5 in the state, and is just been a delight. As you may recall, we give books to children at their checkups, but it's not just giving them the book. We talk about reading, we ask about shared reading, we use the opportunity of the child taking the book from us and to watch what they do and skillfully and intentionally observe what the parents' response is, to say, is there daily reading going on in the home? This isn't simply about handing a book. Otherwise, we just mail books to the home. It'd be easier and cheaper and blah, 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 right? Instead, we want this to be a parenting support tool. We want this to help build parenting confidence, and we want to be able to guide them to places like their local public library, to story times, to be able to check out books, to get advice about books. You would not believe how many people come up to me after talks wanting to know what the best books are. And you all know there's no one such thing as the single best book out there, right? And also, I don't know their kid, right? I don't know what their kids wants are. I don't know what else their kid like, and I'm not going to start doing a reader's advisory, you know, at the end of a conference when I'm, you know, when I have a line of 8 people wanting to talk to me. And I say, please go to your local public library. They are thrilled to help you with that, exactly that question, and all. And hopefully they do actually follow through. If I had to summarize Reach Out and Read in a single graphic, it's this, what I call the prescription to read. I realized this is a slightly old version of the prescription. It actually, for several years now, has said, share books together, because that's what we're really aiming for. And again, this is a silo breaking element, right? This is a little hard when we talk in the policy world. You know, are we education? Are we healthcare? No one seems to really know, and the reality is we're both. We're all of the above. But it is key, I think. So I want to talk for a few moments about the work of advocacy. I spend a lot of time doing advocacy and policy work because I think that is one of the key ways in which we can influence the health of our society, and I think this has bearing on why I'm doing this session today. There's a whole bunch of different definitions of advocacy, and I plucked this one out here. Specifically, this is from a public health frame. Advocacy is the application of information. Information. Gee, who knows about information? That would be libraries. And resources to effect systemic changes that shape the way people in a community live. You notice this isn't about clinics. This isn't about hospitals. This is about how people live in their communities. And again, libraries are in communities, right? So this is where people will come sometimes and say, I need information, I need help, and so on. Julius B. Richmond is a pediatrician. He was a former Surgeon General, and he talked about if we want to change public policy, and let me expand the frame on that just a little bit to say, how do we change public thinking, right? Because policy ultimately follows thinking. So one, we need things like scientific knowledge, okay? And again, that's where you can play such a big part. How do you guide people to the information they actually need, all right? I'll give you an intercurrent example. I still talk to people who believe that COVID-19 in Wisconsin is completely out of control and that it is extremely dangerous to go outside at all. Okay, first of all, yes, we still have circulating virus. Second of all, we can't let up our guard. Third of all, yes, we need to be careful, people in different risk categories, all those things. Okay, yes on all those things. However, if you actually look at data, our statewide rates are about a quarter, as of last night, are about a quarter of what they were back in November when we were seeing big leaps. The point here is not to be reckless or to say we need to reopen everything else, because what we consider a low rate is actually, in Europe, they'd be like freaking out. So, you know, it's all relative. But the point is, I say this to some people and they look at me and say, wait, really? Right? The data is easily available. You can find this without too much work, but people don't look at the numbers, right? They look at a perception, and we'll come back to that. The social strategy, right? How do we get people to think about things and think reasonably and rationally about things in terms of how they're approaching this? And we'll talk in a moment about a few elements of that. And then finally, there has to be the political will. I don't think it's any surprise to any of you that the deep partisanship that we're seeing at most levels of government has turned into, frankly, political game playing and not actually about what's best. We're seeing this in our state government. We're seeing it at the federal level. There's still going to be a lot of that. Hopefully, there's a little less of that, because what we need is actual action and governance. And not game playing going back and forth. We won't focus on the political side too much. That's a whole set of talks in and of itself. But let's think about the other two elements. This is a wonderful online comic strip called Wonder Mark. Really quirky sense of humor. I love this. This is supposed to be Bruce Wayne on the left there, you know, Batman, and his butler Alfred. And this is how I have people think about how we talk about how we help people and ways to approach that. The city's being overrun by criminals, Alfred. I have the power to make a difference. Indeed, Master Bruce, it's so wonderful of you to wish to bring your considerable wealth and resources to bear on such a vital issue. A principled public stance will surely impress the importance of the matter onto your colleagues in the business world. Plus, of course, the plain fact that you're one of the cleverest men I've ever known. I'm sure you'll make great strides in tackling the social ill. Would you go so far as to involve yourself in city government, or perhaps set up an early childhood education program in poverty-stricken neighborhoods? I want to dress in a bat costume and punch individual muggers. Wait, no. Sir, I was about to say, first I have to build a weird car. So I love this because here's the thing. In healthcare, when I see a patient, they are the person being mugged. And hopefully, I'm jumping out of the sky like Batman and punching out the individual mugger of ear infection or fractured leg or whatever the case may be, right? But how many individual muggers can you punch out, right? It's not scalable. It's important to the person getting mugged, right? So we need to also think about, how do we make these larger things? How can we also be Bruce Wayne? How do we apply resources? How do we change the dialogue? So there's patrons who come into your libraries and they have information needs and they work with you, or they call or they email or whatever. I realize not everyone is necessarily open, right? But whatever, they're contacting you. Great, wonderful, please keep doing that. You are being the information Batman. But then let's also think about the information Bruce Wayne, right? How do we do larger scale messaging? How do we help build capacity? How do we help build information literacy, the ability to think and evaluate things? And this gets to an idea of agency versus advocacy, right? That agency is working the system, okay? Someone says to you, help, I don't know how to have X happen, okay? And you help them with that. Versus advocacy, where you actually change the system, where you say, hold on, this is not right. Why do I have 15 people coming in all saying, I don't know how to do X? We need to figure that out, right? Let's figure out how to message that and so on. This is not to say that you don't help individual people, right? Again, that's important for them. But thinking about this in both this individual micro frame and this more macro frame, I think is also important in thinking and recognizing how you can be of service. And also that's how you, changing the system is how you work with policymakers, right? That maybe the issue is that you need to say, hey, folks coming up with policy, let's talk about reliable information sources that help inform good policy, right? That's really important as well. I also want to briefly touch on, I'm not going to be able to do this justice, but I'm going to point you to a resource that you can spend more time on than you ever want, this idea of issue framing. There's an organization called Frameworks, and if you just Google Frameworks Institute, they'll come right up. And they talk about how can we talk about things, about issues, in ways that don't trigger an emotional reflexive response, ideally. And this is research-based work. So this is just a sample of one of their documents, right? If we're talking about the issue of immigration, which of course has come up in the last week at the federal level as the Biden administration has taken office and there's a bunch of changes happening. You know, there's a lot of talking about things in one way or another. And the problem is that those messages often only resonate with people who already agree with you. So how can we talk about things to actually open up dialogues? And then that opens the door to say, now let's look at the information. Let's look at the data that's out there. And this is an example of kind of one of their sheets. They have a million things and a million topics on there. If you don't know about issue framing, please learn about it, because if you are working with folks who are really trying to figure out how do we effectively message, this is one of the most important things I think they can learn. This actually underlies that I write monthly columns in the Capital Times on child health policy. A lot of issue framing goes into that. I just don't want to talk to the same people who already agree with what I'm saying. I want to help kind of, how can we get this information out in different ways and help people expand their understanding, and frankly, to listen to one another, right? We have a listening deficit in our society. Now, yes, because almost everything I've said could apply pre-pandemic, but we got a pandemic going on. And families are facing these extraordinary challenges, economically, emotionally, structurally, physically, all sorts of things are going on. This is an absolutely ancient screenshot, so if you don't squint at these numbers too much because they're so out of date, but this shows you, right, like how many people have actually been infected with the COVID-19 virus. And that's an awful lot of people, and that number continues to grow, and the deaths grow, and so on and so forth. But I would also say, as we all know, people are affected by this virus because of what we need to do in order to control it, which is also critically important, but it creates other issues for people, for families, for others. Because there's a lot of families out there. There's 80 million families in the United States, and they are facing economic hardships and so on. And the reality is, these issues have always been there. I think we all know that. But sometimes people need to be reminded that, like, these struggles have always been present, but they're also being laid bare in so many ways that we have an opportunity now to talk and think about this, because, you know, it's like I give talks on child poverty and people are stunned by the numbers I give them. And they think, again, like I live in Madison, right? And people are like, oh, we have homeless school kids in our school district? Yes, we have over 1,300 homeless school kids, and this is pre-pandemic numbers. And they're shocked, like, what? Here in Madison? Yes, here in Madison. But you don't see kids begging on the street in general, right? So these things are hidden out there. And of course, I would be amiss if I didn't talk about racism and discrimination, which is a health issue. This is a landmark policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics from the summer of 2019. Okay, so pre-pandemic, pre-George Floyd, et cetera, that laid out beautifully, and it's not a difficult read. If you haven't read this, please go read it, because it articulates clearly why we need to be talking and thinking about this stuff with extraordinary, beautifully well done evidence that's out there. So there's a writer, Anatole Breillat, who talked about his experiences of chronic illness. And in this quote, he likens it to Virgil and Dante in the Divine Comedy, right, in the Inferno, going through hell. And he talks about how his ideal healthcare provider would be like Virgil, the guide through hell, pointing out the sights as we go, and so on. And I would argue that this isn't just about doctors and healthcare, right? That librarians actually, we serve that function as well, that guide through an often bewildering world of information that's unclear, what's the quality of the information, and so on. And I think recognizing that is important. Bear with me for a moment to just go through a couple of pieces of Renaissance art, because there's a point to all this. This is Dante and Virgil in the second circle of hell. And you can see Dante there in the red in the lower right, and Virgil to the left of him, pointing out what they're seeing in front of them, right? Being the guide, not necessarily saying, I'm going to take this journey for you, or I'm going to guide you, and I'm going to tell you exactly where to go on this journey, but I'm going to help you understand and explain what you're seeing before you. This is what we do, and this is what we do well. This one, Delacroix, again, you can see Dante there in the red there on the left, and you can see he's kind of losing his balance, the look on his face of horror as he sees what's happening around him. I think we've all felt like this in the last year, just with what this pandemic has done to our society. But you notice Virgil is right next to him, and he's holding his hand and kind of offering support there, right? That's what we do in our fields, whether it's healthcare or librarianship or whatever, right? We help support people, and we help, help them not fall off this boat, so to speak. Because there is hope, right? And that's, I think, one thing we can offer: hope and ways of thinking about how to find that hope that's out there. So we have solutions for now, right? Families need support, people need support. And this is, again, where we can offer that clear-eyed view into what's going on out there. We can support the health of relationships. We can support communication. We can support connection that people have, and we can support them in their information needs. We can do things, right? Some people have said early in this pandemic, they said, why are we talking about books and reading at a time like this? And it's like, well, how can we not talk about books and reading at a time like this? This is when families need the most support. This is where they make a big difference. This makes a big difference in, as schools are closed, as childcare centers are closed or limited or whatnot, that offering suddenly parents who are thrust into this learning at home environment, how can we offer them support and guidance to help them be successful at that? Because, hey, this wasn't just a thing for a couple of weeks or a few weeks. Here we are, right, coming up on a year later, and we're still wrestling with it. There's light at the end of the tunnel, but still. And to come back to just a couple more pictures of Renaissance art, there's opportunity in this. This is Virgil and Dante meeting great poets of history. This is key because I think we've learned a lot. I know in healthcare, look, I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, I said something about trying to do telehealth visits as an initial screen so that families maybe didn't have to bundle up all their children and come into the clinic for something that we might be able to actually evaluate remotely. Can't evaluate everything, but sometimes we have that ability. And I got some strange looks from my colleagues, right? Like, what are you talking about? That's not feasible. Right? Well, here we are. We're doing telehealth throughout the country in so many ways. Again, it's not perfect, but my goodness, it's actually worked for a lot of things. There's so many opportunities sitting in these spaces, and we've also moved policy. We couldn't get telehealth paid for in the healthcare world, and suddenly with the pandemic, it had to get paid for. And now we're like, yes, please, can we not go back to the way it was? Can we still offer that as an option? Because it works really well in, again, some cases. Library services have also adapted and changed in so many ways. And I think there's some interesting flexibilities and things like, we never would have tried that, but now here we are doing it. Let's keep thinking about this. And then this is Dante and Virgil in the Ninth Circle of Hell here in this Gustave Doré painting. And again, you can just see how grim this is. You can see Virgil there on the left. This time it's Virgil who looks sad, who looks downcast, who looks almost defeated. But you notice what's happening here. This time Dante has his arm around Virgil and is supporting him. And I would argue that in these challenging times, all of us, especially those of us in the helping fields, includes healthcare, includes libraries, includes social services, includes education, etc., we too can derive strength and hope from those we're serving, right? Through hearing their stories, through watching their resilience, and through the shared connection. And in the act of helping, in the act of being the guide, as in this painting, I would argue that we ourselves are also helping ourselves, right? In that role of service. So I would encourage you to also think about how you too can also derive that strength from your patrons, because I think it is important for us in terms of how we all get through this together and how we derive strength from each other as well. Now, we have a big role in messaging, and this is what I've been spending a fair amount of time on, because we lock up a lot of things in science in ways that no one can understand. I'm just going to share a few slides with you. I'm not going to dwell on the slides on the details, because I'm not here to give you a talk on vaccines. If you want to talk on vaccines, we can arrange that. But there's a lot of work out there and a lot of mystery around thinking about immunizations and is it safe and so on. So I designed a set of slides that I use in just a handful of talks I do, just to help people understand this in plain language, right? Plain language is important and key. So preclinical things like vaccines, how does it work is really the question that's trying to be answered. Phase 1 trials, is it actually safe, right? Animals are going to keel over the moment you give it to them. Well, okay, we're not going any further on that one. Phase 2, what's the right dose? Phase 3, is it effective, especially in a larger population, right? Maybe is it effective 40% in, or 60% in the early trials, but then, oh, it's only 20% in, later groups, never mind, And then the approval and licensure process, is it actually right for widespread use? And then does it remain safe when many people are using it, et cetera, right? You don't need to get lost in all this, oh, phase 1, phase 2, oh, combined trials, whatever, right? If people are just saying, I want to understand the process, here you go, right? You don't have to get too sophisticated or crazy about it. Just by asking, these are the central questions being answered. Again, there's resources out there, and guiding people to those resources, I think, is critical in a way that's easy to understand. Now, some people may want to say, yeah, hang on, I want more than this. Okay, fine. Guide them to those resources as well. But for many people, especially right now when they're saying, I don't understand all this stuff, okay. Here's another graphic that I showed people, right? So we just talked about drug discovery, we talked about trials, we talked about approval, manufacture, distribution. This is the typical way we do any medication process, including vaccines. How many of us have heard people say, oh, I don't know about this vaccine, it was rushed, it was too quick? Okay, I'm going to tell you right now, I looked into this, I read up on it, and I said, wow, this has actually been done really well. To the point that I actually, not as quickly, but as soon as I could, I signed up to be a participant in one of the COVID-19 vaccine trials, right? So I got injected with something, whether it was placebo or vaccine, was of course not known to me at the time, back in September, okay? I put my arm out, this arm, left arm, and got 2 doses of what I later learned when they unblinded me was indeed investigational vaccine. It's the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is not yet approved for use in the US, but has been in the UK and Europe. Okay, that is how confident I was in what I learned about safety, because, and here's the way I put this in this one graphic, here's the usual process. Well, what they did was, in terms of how did they speed up all these things, they took the manufacture part and did it at the same time as the trials. They had factories making the stuff before it was approved, because if it gets approved, hey, let's roll it out. That's why they were able to approve or authorize the Pfizer vaccine, and it started rolling out within 2 weeks because they had built it up in warehouses. Now, here's the thing. If it gets approved, yay, you have these things ready to go. We got a global pandemic on, can't wait. If it did not get approved because it was, and then you distribute it. If it did not get approved because it didn't work or didn't work well enough or whatever, oh well, sad face, and no distribution happens, and all that stuff goes in the trash. That took 18 months off the timeline easy. Okay, that's not a safety issue or a cutting corners question. It was a financial risk that they took. Yeah, governments took the risk, but again, right? So you've already taken a ton of time off of there. The other thing they took off was a lot of bureaucracy. The FDA wasn't going to sit on this. They were saying, give us the info as you have it, and we're going to review it as it comes in. They weren't going to say, as The Onion said in a wonderful headline, FDA putting COVID-19 vaccine review on the side until it finishes evaluating this bagged salad kit, right? They're not prioritizing the bagged salad kit. They're saying, this is the most important thing going on. Please give it to us right now. So a lot of efficiencies in that, but the review process, the safety and all that stuff, no corners were cut there. I looked into it. I felt confident about it. The other thing is, of course, we can help people understand sometimes very complicated things. People asked me, oh, you've been immunized. So I got the AstraZeneca vaccines, plus I also was eligible for the Pfizer vaccine. Long story as to my decision-making on that. So I've actually had both at this point. And people say to me, does this mean you can now go around and do whatever you want? I'm like, no, actually not. I think of being immunized as being one more layer of protective equipment. I'm still wearing all the same protective equipment in clinic. I'm still wearing a mask in public spaces, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nothing actually changed because we need more data on the efficacy of the vaccine in preventing spread. We know that they seem to be efficacious in preventing severe disease and death. Yay, that's a great thing. We don't yet know about spread because the studies weren't looking at that right out of the gate. We'll find that out later. So things like this graphic, I think, are wonderful. Wisconsin, we got to have a cheese-based messaging slide, right? But it helps us realize, right, that there's many different layers and we need to adhere to these layers. And the great thing is if we miss a few of these layers, right? So if you look at, you just keep forgetting about touching your face and, the ventilation's maybe not the greatest. Okay, but look at all the other layers that keep this from becoming an issue, right? That there's multiple aspects of control. I've talked to schools, I've talked to early childhood centers, I've talked to libraries, all about this. You don't rely on one thing. There's people out there who seem to think we're going to test our way out of this. Nope. Just yesterday, I was listening to a news report, New Zealand, who has done fantastic. They have done absolutely fantastic in protecting their country from this pandemic. Had someone in quarantine, 2 negative tests, followed all the rules, all that stuff, and somehow ended up positive after being released from quarantine. Quickly got re-quarantined, et cetera, right? You can't rely on just one thing. And if they hadn't done a quarantine process, it probably would have done much worse. But again, we don't need to get super crazy about this and start looking at all sorts of data if somebody's just trying to say, I don't understand why I still need to mask if I've been immunized or if this is an issue or not an issue or whatever, right? That these multiple layers help increase it. And again, simple and solid messaging like this helps. And if somebody came in and showed you this and said, I need help understanding, is this actually like a realistic way to think about this, right? How can you help them find the supporting data on this and understand that? That is where you're key and really critical in helping and all that. So you may say, yes, are librarians the right people to do this, right? So much of this is about health and all. I would argue that so much of this is about credibility. And really, so much of what's here is not actually even about data. I'm not throwing data under the bus here. Data and science is really important, but there's something else underpinning all of this. And this is our famed plaque at UW-Madison about this process of sifting and winnowing. We help people sift and winnow that information out there and figure out what is it that's actually meaningful and makes a difference. And this is from Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, right? Most people don't realize how important librarians are. I ran across a book recently which suggested that the peace and prosperity of a culture was solely related to how many librarians it contained. It's possibly a slight overstatement, but a culture that doesn't value its librarians doesn't value ideas, and without ideas, where are we? So I think he made up that book for the story, but that's okay. So. But here's the thing, if you look at studies out there, like this wonderful, I love this, the Society of Chief Librarians, we need terms like that here in the US as well, who pointed out that users trust library staff more than other providers of information and put public library staff second only to doctors in terms of the trust placed in them by seekers of information. trust is the actual underpinning of all of this. We have known this in pediatrics for a long time because we have been dealing with anti-vaccine sentiment for a very long time. And I realized, and many others realized a long time ago, that when somebody comes to you and says, I'm not sure about immunizing my child, it's not actually a fact deficit that's at the heart of that. It's actually a emotion. It's a fear, it's bewilderment, it's feeling lost. If we don't acknowledge that, that's, I think, really important. So if a patron comes into you and comes in or writes to you and says, I'm worried about, and let's say they spout some conspiracy theory that is clearly like just nuts, right? You know, whatever. The first thing, of course, is to listen. Hear them out, let them feel heard. Validate the emotion, right? Yeah, that's some scary things you're hearing, or that's some really concerning stuff. So I think one of the key things we need to look into is, how do we judge what is or isn't true in a world that does offer us these challenges? And now let's talk about how to judge that information, right? And make it about the process, about the evaluation, and so on. We learned that about vaccines, right? That talking about safety, talking about the positives, about the benefits, that all these things, instead of just poo-pooing like, oh, you can't listen to that nonsense. Hey, trust me, you end up a long day. Sometimes I'm thinking that in the back of my head, like, oh gosh, please don't listen to what your uncle sent you on Facebook, you know, like really. But if we blow people off, then they're just not going to come back to us. And I think trust, and the trust that the public holds in the world of librarianship, is really critical and makes you really important messengers for all these sorts of things. So your challenge, be more visible, be out there. Don't wait for people to come to you in the library if your library is open, but make sure that people are, you know, you might think about working with your local TV or radio stations if you're not already doing so, right? Helping people understand that you're still there to answer questions, to offer support, all those sorts of things. Get in their faces, get in curricula, whether it's in your local schools or beyond. You need to be part of that wider world, because that's where we need you. That's where you really do. You make an impact in your library. We also need you to make an impact everywhere else, because you should be there. Find champions, right, who say, hey, you guys have helped me out. Yes, can you please come in and talk in my institution, in my school, in wherever that may be. Be confident, okay? You've been well trained. You know how to do this. And you should be following this hunger, because when you give it over to information amateurs, this is where you get all sorts of creative things, badly creative, you know, falsehoods, suppositions. You know, we're spending a lot of time talking about, you know, conspiracy theories and anti-vaccines and whatever. What I want to know is, who's the person who's sitting there and putting together that Facebook meme? Like, what's going on in their head, right? Because I think a lot of them actually know that what they're saying isn't true, and we need to get to the bottom of that. That's a whole different issue. And be much like Virgil was to Dante. Be the trusted guide through the many worlds that patrons must navigate. I love John Milton. I almost ended up getting a PhD in English literature and would have focused on Milton. But he talks here about needing to run in that race, the immortal garland to be run for. It's not easy work. I get it. It is so hard. There's so many challenges in all of her fields, but it is worth it, right? It is absolutely important that we exercise those virtues, those skills, and so on that's out there. And I'll close with this quote: our libraries create dreams. If you take away the libraries, you take America's dreams away. And now I'm happy to take questions, which hopefully you've been placing in the question boxes and will be shared with me. And I will also just add in on my closing slide here, which is taking a moment to appear. There we go. Oh yes, my closing quote. I'll be a story in your head, but that's okay. We're all stories in the end. Just make it a good one, okay? And that is, of course, from the 11th Doctor from Doctor Who. my public-facing social media, email if you have questions that are later on or wish to follow me on those public-facing social medias. And by the way, we also have a new podcast as of last July, the Reach Out and Read podcast, reachoutandread.org/podcast. I am the host. If you're not already sick of listening to me, we talk about children's books, reading, parenting, all sorts of things. Please subscribe, tell your friends. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Navsaria. We did have some questions that came in, so we'll get right to it. Any more thoughts, or do you have any suggestions for how to respond? Well, I think you partly answered this, but I want to follow up on it. Do you have any suggestions for how to respond to when people come into the library, when they object to wearing a mask, when they say the virus is a hoax? Is it appropriate to respond with issue framing if they aren't asking a question? So any tips for that? So I think you answered that with the listening, which I think is really key. At that point, would you at that point then, after the listening part, do you think it's okay or appropriate then to suggest other resources, or suggest that maybe they look more into the meme that their uncle sent them on Facebook? So any tips for that?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, if somebody is walking in without a mask, right? I mean, honestly, that's a safety issue. And we also, I assume that most libraries have rules about, people aren't allowed to walk in without pants on or whatever the case may be, right? I would treat it in the same way that, you have certain standards of what people are not allowed to do. Wearing a mask is one of those standards, and well within your rights to protect yourselves, staff, etc., and other patrons. It's your decision, and I would handle that the same way you would if anyone else was being disruptive if they push the limits. Now, if they're coming in wanting to have a conversation about it, or say, well, I think this is all a hoax, I'm wearing this mask, but I don't like it, blah blah blah. Yeah, that's where thinking about issue framing, and again, this is where I think, I use this a lot with our health sciences students, be intensely curious about why they're saying that. So if someone says, I think this is all a hoax, yeah, can you tell me more about that? Because I think it's clearly something that's concerning you. You don't have to agree with them, right? Just be curious about why they got to that point and how. And let them lead themselves, in a sense, to a better place on that. Sometimes sometimes as they start to talk about it, they start to realize, hang on, this doesn't make sense.
Thank you. So maybe as a follow-up to that, we had another question come in asking how you feel about our state legislature moving to eliminate the state mask mandate.
Completely against it. I think that there's ample, well-done scientific evidence across mass populations, frankly, from not quite a year ago, right, that states that put mask mandates into place and communities that put mask mandates into place had significantly less spread, right? It's not an experiment anyone constructed, because you can't, but it's what we call a natural experiment, right? That some places tried it out and other places nearby didn't do it, and you compare and contrast the two, and we saw a big difference. We also know a lot more about the virus than we did a year ago, right? We initially thought that direct touch surfaces was a key contributor to spread, and what we've discovered is that it's not as big a deal, right? That actually, that's minor. I'm not going to say it's zero, but it's minor compared to masks being very effective. The state legislature can only do what they can do what they like, and if we don't like that, well, one, we need to tell them. We need to call them and tell them, particularly if your elected representative is someone who's voting to eliminate mandates that, that hopefully that you believe are backed by science. And if they don't listen, well, that's what elections are for.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, do you think libraries should invest in air filters as another level of precaution?
I think that that starts to wander into things that I am not an expert on, like HVAC systems and so on. But here's the thing: we do know that good air exchange with the outside world helps. Here's quick metaphor as to how I think about it. If you have a small, 5-gallon fish tank, and you take half a cup of red dye, it's filled with water, and you put it in, you're going to get red water. Now take a 50-gallon fish tank and take the same half a cup of red dye and put it in. You're going to get the water, but it's not going to be intensely red. It's going to be maybe just a little light pink because there's so much of a dilutional effect. So when we're outside or when we're in a large room, that airspace, that mass of air around you is diluting how much the virus focuses and concentrates versus if you're standing in a old style phone booth with the door closed with someone who has COVID. And that's the easy way to get people to think about it, because here's the thing. Sometimes people get confused and say, oh, well, maybe we should have fans blowing air around the room. It's like, oh gosh, no, please don't do that, because now you're just actually circulating and spreading it in that same mass of air. It's all about air mass. And if you have good air exchange with the outside, if your HVAC system does a lot of good air exchange, then you're essentially effectively increasing the volume of air that's out there. There's all sorts of standards that are being looked at and talked about in your HVAC world, and that's where I turn you over to your HVAC engineers to advise you on.
Great. We've had a few questions be submitted regarding the vaccine. Or do you want to take those at this point, or would you prefer people follow up with you after the webinar?
I'm happy to take them if
okay.
You know how many questions you have, and I'm happy to answer whatever.
And we might not get to all of them, and that's okay. So one of the questions is, so the vaccine will lessen the severity of the virus if it is contracted. It is not immunity, correct?
It is immunity. Immunity is never absolute, right? So for example, influenza vaccine, even in years where the match isn't perfect, I look at kids, for example, children who've been immunized generally don't end up being hospitalized with complications of influenza. Those that do end up getting hospitalized with complications of influenza are almost exclusively unimmunized, right? They still have some immunity, it's just not necessarily perfect.
Thank you. Where do you think librarians should be involved in the public sphere in pro-vaccine advocacy?
I would take it out of the world of pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, and I would say, we're here to tell you what the information says. We're here to help you understand what the information says. We're here to help you understand the process by which that information was reached. And I think if you are comfortable saying this, you can say, this was done reasonably well, this was done safely, and it was done efficaciously, and here's all the data, and here's the way to think about it. And that keeps you out of getting into kind of, that's where issue framing comes in, right? If you just say, well, we think vaccines are important, well, they are, but some people will stop listening to you and say, oh, well, you already made up your mind. Help people recognize how to evaluate the information that they're hearing, and how they can trust sources.
Thank you. Can you talk about the recent media coming out regarding double masking? For those whose libraries are still open, is this a real step that staff could take to increase safety?
I think the double masking is because we have no standards on masks, right? Like, so everyone and their brother has started manufacturing masks in the last year. Some of them are quite good. Okay, there's a few I use that have triple cloth layers. This is when I'm not in clinic. And if you blow, you don't feel the air coming through. You can't blow out a candle with them, right? Like, okay, probably pretty good. And then there's masks that, like, I'm blowing, I'm like, I can feel this right on my hand, We don't have standards because people needed to wear masks, and even those not so great ones work better than nothing. So double masking kind of increases the likelihood there. I don't know that anyone has actually said wearing a formal surgical mask with a second mask over it is necessary. At the same time, is it harmful to do so? Not at all, especially since mask supplies are a lot better than they were.
Great. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions, if that is okay. Do you have the time? Okay, great. So what would be the best way to reopen our libraries since most staff have not been vaccinated?
So the way I would think about this is that we operated health clinics for months in person. A lot of places we're seeing patients in person. without necessarily significant measures. Okay, until just a couple of months ago, I was wearing a face shield and a simple surgical face mask, right? Not an N95 or anything like that. My system changed this over to N95s and PAPRs just because they're reusable. I don't know that it actually was all that necessary. PAPRs are the hood thing, like the top half of a biohazard suit. But, you know, for months we were doing this. And keep in mind, right, I work in a field where small, ill children come and cough on me, right? Like that is my job.
Right.
So I think handling materials, not a big deal. If you're in patron-facing spaces and so on, again, simple masking. If you want to consider a face shield, you know, sure. I wouldn't, again, vaccination is one more element, but it is not the magic element that fixes everything. So I wouldn't necessarily predicate your thinking solely on that. And then, of course, keep in mind that people do have their own individual health needs, risks, et cetera. And that's something that does need to be considered just on a case-by-case basis.
All right, I lied. I'm going to ask you 2 more questions now.
Go ahead.
Do you recommend, you talked a little bit about the virus on surfaces. So do you recommend that libraries continue disinfecting surfaces hourly if we are open? And is that something we should be doing?
I don't know that that there's any data that shows that hourly disinfection matters. Again, let's remember, virus does not get through skin, right? So it's when people touch surfaces, if there happened to be recent viable virus on it, and now they rub their eyes, their nose, their mouth, you know, that sort of thing without doing hand hygiene. If you do hand hygiene, that takes care of it. So this is also why like gloves were never a good idea, because the moment that gloved hand touches something, it's contaminated. And then if you touch your face, it's like you've accomplished nothing. And in fact, people wash their hands less when they wear gloves and so on. If you don't already know it, I would point you to the RELM studies done by IMLS on materials and all. I've been waiting for those studies actually for like the last 15 years because we always get some regulator telling us that we can't have children's books in clinic waiting rooms because they're an infection risk, and they have zero data to show that it's credible. And I'm like, finally, someone's doing this. So, yeah.
Great. So this will be our last question. How do we best convince our funders the importance of libraries in the internet area?
The importance of libraries and
I'm sorry, how do we best convince our funders the importance of libraries in the internet era? Sorry, I said area.
Yeah,
I meant era.
I heard area, and I was like, okay, yeah. So I think there's different ways to think about that. I think the best thing is to provide an example. If you have an example of a patron who did something, or even better, if there was public investment or dollars spent or grants given or whatever for something because somebody didn't understand how to find reliable information, then and that if they had actually talked to a librarian, they would have had more reliable advice. That can also put the fear in them of like, oh, well, okay, we really need to make sure that we're not just taking people's say so for it, right? That we need to make sure that there's good data there. I think that providing a good case study is probably the best way. The same way that like when I talk to policymakers, telling them about a patient, right? Cut out the identifiers, privacy, all that stuff, right? But saying, look, this is what someone came with, and this is how I was able to help them because of X. That sticks with people. Just like my last slide here says, we're all stories in the end. You give them a story and an example, it makes it very concrete. Otherwise, it's so abstract that they're thinking, yeah, whatever, you're just here to get your library funding. It's not really about what's good, right? Well, if you can give them that concrete example, because guess what? If you give them a good, simple, straightforward story, they're going to go tell their friends. And sometimes it even gets repeated, like during a debate on budget or something, like, well, I was told this, you know, and there you go.
Thank you. Well, that is all the time we have. Again, I want to thank you, Dr. Navsaria, for this session. Thank you all for your questions, and I encourage you to follow up if your question didn't get answered today. So as mentioned, the session recording will be posted on our conference website by Friday. There also is a short survey that will appear on your screen after the presentation today, and it will also be emailed to you, and we appreciate your feedback. We have 2 sessions coming up in our next track at 10:30. We have a track today in small libraries and a track in management. And again, those begin at 10:30 and they continue at 1 o'clock and 2:30 today. So we hope to see you at some of those. If not, we hope you have a great rest of your day. So long.